Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 597. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anslone, and returning to the show today is our friend Misty Winston. Misty, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay today, actually. Not too bad.
All right, well, that's good to hear, and my guess is that your mood has something to do with what's going on with Julian Assange, which is, of course, why we bring you back on the show every time. Although, Misty, as we were talking about before the show, and maybe this isn't a coincidence, I feel like every time I have you on the show to talk about Assange, there's several other stories out there that are going to make the bigger headlines than Julian Assange, unfortunately, but also things I would like your take on because you're a pretty keen observer of world affairs. So we will talk a little bit of Gaza news, but we're really going to hit hard on the Julian Assange stuff. Do not want to bury that today. Everybody, for now, if you want to follow Misty and keep up with her work, follow her on Twitter. It's at Sarcasm Stardust. And anything else, Misty, anywhere else I could send people for you?
You can go to Action for Assange on YouTube and all of those places. We just covered the hearings this morning live at very, very, very early in the morning. And we're doing we covered the David McBride hearings as well and things like that. So if you want information on whistleblowers and press freedom things and all of that stuff, and as well just to keep up with the activism that we do on those issues, Action for Assange is a very good place to do that.
All right. Well, let's get into it today. Misty, if somebody isn't maybe up to familiar, they understand generally what's going on with Julian Assange. They don't say who's Julian Assange or what's WikiLeaks. But at the same time, they're maybe not fully up to date on the actual status. Where is he at and what's currently going on?
Well, luckily, I feel like your audience is very in tune with this type of stuff, and so they're very informed about the situation. But just to give like some brief context to where we're at right now. So a couple months ago, there was another request for appeal. So in the UK court system, you can't just appeal. You have to request permission to appeal or leave to appeal, as they call it. There was a hearing a couple months ago where that Judge Jonathan Swift, denied that request for appeal, which obviously the Assange defense team then also appealed that decision as well. There was more hearings that took place in March, at the end of March, under two new judges. And they heard all of the arguments from both the prosecution and the defense team. And then they did a very strange move, which has caused a lot of confusion and controversy. Rather than just ruling on the issue at hand, they then offered the U.S. the opportunity to, they said, hey, here's the three things that we think Assange has basis to appeal on. And if you could just provide us some assurances that these things will be addressed, then we can move forward with the extradition. And so they offered the United States that opportunity to provide those assurances. Not the first time that has happened. The United States obviously took that opportunity. And then today was the actual final decision on that appeal. And Julian Assange was actually granted a partial right to appeal. So we just kicked the can down the road a little bit further, but it was the best of two terrible options. So a little bit of good news, I suppose.
Okay. So yeah, that when I read it this morning, that's kind of what it sounded like to me, was that they just bought themselves another, 60 days here, 60 or 90 days. It was either 2 or 3 months from the last ruling to this one. And of course, what we talked about the last time you were on the show, Misty, was they don't want this extradition to happen before the election. And, we're probably looking at 2025, although maybe over the holidays in 2024 would be a great time to do something big and political like this, right as the entire country is completely burned out on politics and just wants to forget all of our elected officials because we've had to listen to them for so long. So that seems to be a little bit of what's going on. Now, I guess, is there any reason for optimism here that maybe, and look, my understanding was when they granted the set of things that Assange could appeal on, if the U.S. didn't provide the correct assurances, people like Glenn Greenwald and other, kind of legal experts said that this one seemed the most significant because the U.S. had essentially argued the opposite in court.
Yeah. Yes. And so is there cause for optimism? I mean, listen, if I didn't have a tiny bit of hope in my otherwise cold, dead heart, I wouldn't do what I do. I wouldn't be focused on this as heavily as there is. I do think that we can win this thing. But I think that, and as we've spoken about many times here on this show and elsewhere, it's going to take mass public pressure. The court system is not going to do the right thing because it's the right thing. They're going to do whatever the United States tells them to do. And the United States government is not going to do the right thing just because it's the right thing. They're going to have to be forced politically to do what is necessary here. So is there cause for optimism? Of course there is, but you're absolutely correct. I think what is almost certain to happen is they're going to kick this can down the road past the election. I mean, if Trump wins, the lame duck season would be a really opportunistic moment for Joe Biden just to kind of let that extradition go through and leave it in Trump's hands, which is a terrifying prospect, given that Trump was the guy that spied on Julian Assange, plotted to assassinate him, and then in fact had him arrested. So that's a very terrifying prospect, especially given the fact that Donald Trump has said recently that he would be open to having Mike Pompeo back in his administration, which is the guy that initially kicked all of this stuff off after Vault 7 was released. That really hurt Mike Pompeo's feelings. And he's been on a personal vendetta to get Julian Assange ever since. So there's always cause for optimism. I mean, until Julian Assange is in ADX Florence, and even then there's still room for fighting. But I mean, unless he's, and I hate to even say it out loud, but unless he's dead, there's still an opportunity to fight and to get him freed. So I think that there's no reason to lose that. And especially given the fact we have so much momentum right now, the awareness around this case is greater than it's ever been. More and more people are starting to recognize what's happening here and understand the implications of it and how serious it is. And as that continues to grow, we're going to start building that mass pressure. And I think that that's we just have to keep our eyes forward, keep our eyes on the prize, and just really keep plugging away.
Absolutely. And when I said that, I guess I meant more the fight in the UK, because once he comes to the US, we have a whole new battle on our hands.
Yeah.
And in some way, it really is more in our hands at that point.
Yeah.
You know, right now, we are trying to pressure the Biden administration to drop extradition charges against him. But there's just a certain amount of the Americans, it's still happening overseas, even if it's all about the U.S., even if it's about, bringing Julian Assange, who, Americans may be somewhat familiar with the name, on an average basis. Even though we're talking about bringing him to the U.S., it's still a different thing when they're talking about extraditing him to the U.S., where I think a lot of Americans believe that there will be some ability for him to get a fair trial. But once he comes here, I think we're really going to be able to talk to the public and explain that he's not going to get a fair trial. My real concern is that it might be too late. If we look at what's happened in the U.S. empire, through the 12 years that Assange has either been in the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK or in, lockup in Belmarsh, our rights have eroded a lot. And
Yeah.
the deep state, I've been trying to think of how to explain how Trump made everything worse. And he allowed for the deep state to be unmasked, but then made themselves the heroes to a lot of Americans because he was unable to properly expose them. And so we have a whole new beast that we're dealing with here, where the deep state doesn't have to operate the way it did under the Bush and Obama administrations. And so you really worry that we could watch the real public execution of Julian Assange in the United States now, Misty. And I mean, that's kind of the death of the American Republic for what's left of it. So, I mean, I still think this is a huge issue. So, yeah, what, your thoughts on that, or anything else on Assange?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's very, obviously there's a lot going on. There's a lot of really turbulent things happening. I think a lot of people are focused elsewhere. And that's, I mean, not to judge anybody for being so. I mean, there's a whole genocide taking place. It's really difficult to look away from that and focus on literally anything else. I myself find myself struggling to turn away from that kind of stuff. So, but I think that you're right. I think that if Assange is in fact extradited to this country, that really takes away, first of all, the ability of American media to continue to ignore this case, which they have done a very fantastic job of doing over the course of the past 12, 13, 14 years. They don't talk about it. When they do, it's like a 2-minute segment where they smear Julian Assange for being weird or creepy or whatever they want to do. And so they really haven't discussed the case in any real substantive way, or the implications in terms of what it means for not just Americans, but literally everybody across the globe in terms of free speech, press freedom, all of that stuff. So I think that there's been a really significant effort to avoid having those conversations. conversations. But further, I think that it's really been about distracting away from talking about what the releases actually revealed. I think that they've done a great job in the coverage that they managed to do of focusing on Assange, the person, the personality. As I mentioned, there's all the smears about him, about he doesn't take care of his cat, he smears poop on the walls, he's a traitor, he's a hacker, he's a Russian, all of those things that they like to say. But in focusing the conversation in that direction, nobody's talking about the war crimes that were revealed. And that's, I mean, you and I have discussed this before, I think, on the my prior appearance here, when I was saying that in my estimation, they were not going to extradite him in the middle of an election year, especially this election year, as Joe Biden is currently committing who knows how many war crimes on a daily basis. I don't think that they want to open up that conversation and have people begin to be curious about who Julian Assange is. Well, why do they want to extradite him? Why is he being brought here? What did he reveal that was so bad? All of those things, all of those conversations, I think they are desperate to avoid. And I think that that is why they're just trying to kick this can as far down the road as they possibly can, certainly through the election. Frankly, I think that they would like for him to just die in prison. Then they can wash their hands of it and be done with it. I also think that the UK is probably a little anxious to get this off of their plate. I don't know that they want to be the ones responsible for Julian Assange dying in their prisons, but I think that they are obviously the servants of the United States. And so that they're just playing their role and doing their duty, if you will, to the United States government, as well as Australia has been involved in this. Ecuador has been involved. Sweden's been involved. There are multiple vassal states of the United States who have been involved in the persecution of Julian Assange. So, yeah, I think that they're just really trying to avoid having those legitimate conversations about press freedom and all of the war crimes that were exposed, and not just war crimes, but corruption and all different kinds of things that Julian Assange has exposed, not just about the United States, but about countries across the globe. He's exposed just about everybody there is to expose, including corporations and all of that stuff. So I think that that is really what's at play here. I think that they're just trying to avoid bringing those things into the public consciousness. They've done a great job of doing it so far, but bringing him here, as you mentioned, that opens a can of worms I'm not sure that they really want to open. And I think that that really would awaken a sleeping beast. I think that generally speaking, as you mentioned, people in this country are not really focused on Assange. It's not happening here. And I think, unfortunately, human nature is that if it's not happening to you or around you, you're not really paying attention to it. And although this is happening to all of us because it's all of our rights that are at risk, I think people don't make that connection. But I think if he is brought here, once that happens, that's going to, I think people are going to snap out of that and really start paying attention to what's happening. At least that's my hope. Obviously, we've seen the U.S. Assange movement grow tremendously over the course of the past decade or so, certainly in the last 5 years since he's been in Belmarsh. But we just need to continue that momentum, continue building those, that kind of activism and that kind of pressure campaign. And I think that that's really what they're trying to avoid at any and all costs. And we know that. Julian Assange did us a great favor by revealing what was going to happen to him long before it happened to him. If you look in the Stratfor files, which WikiLeaks released, there's a conversation in there where they discuss how they're going to deal with their quote unquote Assange problem. And one of the ways that they discussed is, well, we'll just tie him up in legal stuff for the next 25 years, which is exactly what they're doing. Anybody paying attention to this for any amount of time knew what was coming. And we knew the fight that we were facing. We're certainly punching way above our weight class here. But the more and more people that we get on board, the more pressure we're going to be able to mount. And I mean, we've seen crazier things happen. So I think that we just have to keep building that momentum, keep putting that pressure on, and just hope for the best.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about his health, because I see you have this tweet out here on your feed. Assange was once again too ill to attend court. We haven't seen him publicly since the photo was leaked from the day he had a mini stroke in October 2021. That's quite some time ago. Demand to see and hear from Assange. Let him speak. And Misty, I mean, that's an amount of time where you can imagine if this was a dissident in Russia or China or Iran, they would be saying, let's see proof of life and, let this person out. That Chinese tennis player a few years ago who insulted the government, they're demanding public statements from her. And so I guess, where do you believe his health is? I know you read a lot, and there have been some accounts from journalists who've been able to visit him in prison. They certainly describe him as less well than when he was taken into prison. But to what extent do you think that is, and just how vulnerable is his life at this point?
I think it's incredibly vulnerable. I mean, he's already had a mini stroke, which is almost always a precursor to more serious health events in the future. And I mean, that could happen at any given moment. His wife, his brother, his father, as you mentioned, some journalist friends who have been able to visit him have all spoken about this, that he is very thin. He is doing his best to, I guess, mentally stick in there. I don't know that there's a stronger mind. I'm not sure I could deal with the amount of stuff he's had to deal with over the course of the past 13 or 14 years. He is trying his best to keep a positive mindset and to stay focused on the task at hand. But obviously, he's being held in horrendous conditions. They call Belmarsh the Guantanamo of the UK. He is treated incredibly poorly, very unfairly. He's held in essentially solitary confinement, 22 to 23 hours a day, depending on how nice they feel that day. He was prohibited from having glasses for a while, which he has very bad eyesight. They gave him a laptop with the keys glued down, so he's been unable to really participate in his own defense. When he was able to go to one of the court hearings, but he was still in Belmarsh. They made him go to like this little room and like video, like Skype in essentially. But he was like strip searched and all of this stuff multiple times a day. His legal paperwork was taken from him. And this is, I mean, it's just, there's so many examples. That's really, it's death by a thousand cuts. This is, the process is the punishment. That is what's taking place here. I don't think, as I said, do they want to extradite him? I mean, I'm sure that they wouldn't mind it, but they're already accomplishing their goal by essentially torturing him to death. We're watching an execution in slow motion. That is what is happening. They're hoping to just wear him down over the course of these years and really just destroy him as a human being. So his health is not good. It's not been good for some time. And that's what makes this really such a really, I mean, this is it. I mean, there's a human being on the line, and obviously it's very easy to stand up and fight for the press freedom aspect of this and the free speech aspect of this for anybody who cares about those issues. But also we need to remember that he's just a human being. I think a lot, and Assange supporters are guilty of this as well. I think a lot of people kind of like make him a superhero, sort of like he's become kind of this the face of a movement or whatever. And I think people forget sometimes that he is just in fact a dude. Like he's just a guy. He's a father. He's a husband. He's a brother. He's a friend. I mean, he's just a guy, and there's only so much one human being can take. And legitimately, his life is on the line. And I think that that is a very important aspect of this that needs to not be forgotten about for sure.
Well, definitely. And I think there's also been, a little bit too, where a lot of people look past the man and only to the issue, right? And
yeah,
a part of this is because of the very effective smear campaign that was ran against him by the US, UK, Swedish governments, alleging. And, a lot of people now will just kind of say, oh, the rapist, when you talk about Julian Assange, because, and not because, they're trying to smear Julian Assange or provoke me because they know I'm a supporter, that from watching cable TV, that's, kind of just playing the association game, right? Like if you said Hillary Clinton to me, I would say murderer or war criminal. That's, just the same thing that pops into their head. So, that's been just so incredibly effective. And so it is, like you said, really important to remember that there is a man there who has 2 kids and a wife and a brother and a father. And, must be horrific, particularly for her, who, Stella, who his wife, who probably has the most contact with him, watch him, kind of his health deteriorate over these years and the way it has, and completely unnecessary too, right? Like he could just be a free man. Misty, we're talking about having somebody in a prison where they let him out of his cell, 1 or 2 hours a day. What's he potentially guilty of? A serial killer, a mass rapist,
right?
And we're talking about here somebody who leaked documents, a violation of the Espionage Act, but still no physical threat to anyone
No
in any
history of
way.
violence, zero history of violence whatsoever. He is no threat to anybody. The idea that he's being held in prison at all is astounding to me. But then to be held in Belmarsh, I mean, this is mass murders, terrorists, rapists. Some of the worst are held in this prison. And that's where you have Julian Assange. And Kyle, he's being held on remand. He's being held not because he's charged with anything in the UK. He's being held just because the US says so. And that's, I mean, it blows my mind that that is what's taking place right now.
I also think I read that he's one of the longest serving prisoners in the institution now,
Yeah.
maybe the second longest.
Yep.
And so it just, goes to show that even serial killers or whatever in the UK don't get these kind of sentences, at least not in these kinds of conditions, right? They're probably like moved around and put in less serious confinement at certain points in their stay, which you would have thought would have happened at some point throughout this. And, maybe then he would be well enough to attend court and participate in his defense and all these things I'm sure he really wishes he could do. I can't imagine what it's like to go through life without your glasses. I'm a contact wearer. I have pretty bad vision. And, it's really hard if I don't have my contacts and to even go to the grocery store and to interact with people because, I could barely see their faces. And so I can't imagine what it's like for Assange to not have that access and constantly interacting with, different guards and just trying to recognize people. Must be an awful existence they're putting him through. And it just shows, what you get for going against the empire. So Misty, is there did they schedule a court date? Do we know what's next yet? Or are we just kind of waiting on an announcement from WikiLeaks or Stella to tell us?
So I heard some rumblings about that the lawyers will be back in court later on this week. I'm not sure how accurate that is. I've been kind of waiting for some confirmation on that myself. But I mean, where we go from here is the appeals process, which everybody knows that an appeals process is designed to take a very long time. So that's where, I mean, he remains in Belmarsh for the duration of that process regardless. I think we all know that that will be dragged out, at least as we mentioned earlier, past the election. So we're looking at least another 5-6 months, whatever it is, that he will be in Belmarsh, continuing for his health to deteriorate and all of that stuff, being separated from his family, all of those things that he has been dealing with for the past 5+ years. He will continue to deal with, and that's really unfortunate. I mean, it is. To me, I think that the idea that this is even being considered, that the extradition of this man to this country, that's even being considered, to me, it blows my mind. I mean, that we know that the United States at the highest levels of the Trump administration was plotting to assassinate Julian Assange, period. We know that happened. And so the idea I mean, you can't extradite somebody if the death penalty is on the table. That was one of the points of contention today at this hearing. That was then taken. The U.S. said, we promise. Trust me, bro. And the court accepted that really without any further conversation. But we were plotting to assassinate him. We really take the trust me, bro, seriously. It is astonishing to me, not to mention the fact that we know that the United States, the CIA, under Mike Pompeo, funded by Sheldon Adelson, was spying on Julian Assange, including, we should mention very, very, very specifically, conversations with his legal team, which is a massive, massive violation of his human rights. So, I mean, imagine going into a court battle against the world's largest superpower, and it turns out they've been spying on your legal conversations this whole time. I mean, the idea that he can get a fair trial at this point is ridiculous. That it just doesn't exist. So the idea that this is even being considered, that we're even having this conversation, blows my mind. And it's very strange to me that, I mean, I recognize that there's a lot going on. People don't really know what's happening, but that people don't care about this has always been very weird to me, because if they can do it to Assange, you best believe they can and will do it to you. And that's what this really is about. That's what the whole "We Are All Assange," that whole campaign slogan, if you will, has always meant, is that it's not, I mean, it's about Assange because he is the person being used as, that kind of tipping off point, or that kicking off point to this kind of thing. But it's not really about Assange. It's about all of us. It's about all of our right to know, our right to hold government to account, our right to hold power to account, our rights to have conversations and engage in healthy debates and all of that stuff. That's all on the line here. The very fundamentals of our so-called democracy is what's at stake here. And that's what I think a lot of people are missing. And as you mentioned, that's really because of the very effective smear campaign about Julian Assange. And it's really about the absolute failure of mainstream press in this country to cover this thing in any real way, which is not surprising. We know who they work for. But however much you hate the mainstream media, it's not enough.
Absolutely, Misty. If you remember, Donald Trump was waging a war against journalists until he indicted Julian Assange, and that
Right.
narrative completely went away. And Joe Biden, because he has a friendly correspondence dinner and gives a former IDF soldier an award for being the best journalist, suddenly we're supposed to pretend like there isn't this war against journalism going on that's more intense than ever before. And I really do think, especially at this point in time, it's more than just the First Amendment. It's more than just journalism, more than just Julian Assange. It's what our government could do to us, right?
Yeah.
Are we going to let them throw us in jail for political reasons and leave us there to rot until we die? Because
Yeah.
that's what they're doing and have done to Julian for 12 years. Every time you come on this show, Misty, again, there's always huge other news that we want to talk about, right? And every single time I make the point, you always agree with me. If WikiLeaks was functioning, if Julian Assange was just a journalist, what more will we know?
Yeah.
What details, what evidence has the U.S. collected of war crimes in Gaza, right? We know U.S. drones are taking surveillance. They're supposed to be helping to locate the hostages, but I'm sure they're collecting evidence of all kinds of Israeli war crimes. Boy, if some State Department official could leak that to WikiLeaks, this war could have been stopped months ago.
Yeah.
Tens of
Ukraine,
thousands of children would be
COVID.
alive, right?
Yeah.
All of these
Yeah.
things. And
Yeah.
so, I guess anything else about Assange, because I do want to ask you about this ICC indictment and your overall just kind of take on what's happening in Gaza.
So just a few things on the Assange stuff, just in terms of getting active yourself. So there is a bipartisan piece of legislation in the House right now called House Resolution 934. We just did a postcard campaign prior in the lead up to this hearing today. We kind of put that on hold about a week or so ago because we knew that any postcard sent wouldn't be able to reach representatives in time before the hearing. But now that we have this kind of the stay on things and this sort of delay on things where we essentially have to start all over again and just continue to rebuild that pressure. I'm sure that we'll do another postcard campaign, but if you can call your representatives, it's a fascinating piece of legislation, very simple. It just calls for the release of Julian Assange and the protection of journalistic activities. Should be something that pretty much anybody could support, but unfortunately there are a very limited number of co-sponsors. The Assange issue is kind of the third rail in politics right now, but that's why we need to keep putting that pressure on, because the more they feel pressure from us, the more inclined they will be to start speaking on it. And we've seen that happen. We have, if you would have told me even just 4 or 5 years ago that we would have bipartisan legislation that mentions Julian Assange by name, I'm not sure I would have believed you. That just shows how far that we've really come. This used to be an issue. No, but he was like Voldemort. Like nobody in politics would even say his name. I mean, Bernie Sanders, for example, still won't say his name. Like it is one of those issues that nobody wants to talk about, that nobody wants to bring up. But we've slowly kind of changed that environment, and we continue to just keep putting that pressure on. So it's House Resolution 934. You can do phone calls, emails, all of that stuff. And again, listen, I'm not sure how much stock I put into that kind of a phone calls and things like that. I'm not sure that that's going to be the change maker, but that's something super simple that anybody can do. And if thousands of people do it, then I think that really can move the needle. And we've seen that the Australian activists have done a really fantastic job of lobbying their own politicians. Late last year, we saw 6 of those politicians from a cross-partisan Assange support group in Parliament came to the United States, held meetings with members of Congress, and that really helped to move the needle as well. So we just need we really just need, I'm going to sound like I'm like whining here, but we just need help. Like we need help. We need as much help as we can possibly get. We need as many people. I'm not asking anybody to make it their life or to, be super focused on it like I am. But if, everybody made a phone call a day or, 2 phone calls a week or whatever you can commit to, that is tremendously helpful. And I think that as we continue to build those numbers, we're going to start to see that needle move more and more. And it really is a real pressing issue. This is a guy who, as we mentioned, his health is declining. There's a real chance that he could, have another serious health event. And I mean, again, I hate to even say it out loud, but he is being killed. Like he is being murdered right now in slow motion. And so this is really like there's not a lot of time here, in my opinion, given the circumstances that he's in and the conditions he's being held in, and the his current state of health. I think that again, one human being can only take so much. So we need help on House Resolution 934. We need help on a whole host of issues. First of all, if you see Assange tweets, please help us get through the algorithm because they're unbelievably suppressed. If you see a video, and I would recommend to you, Kyle, to not include Assange in your title, because if you include Assange in the title of a video, it will get suppressed. That happens all the time. So YouTube videos or anything like that, if you see Assange stuff that is educational and informative and that helps to get the word out, help us by spreading that stuff. That's a really, really, really helpful way, because frankly, most people don't know what's happening because it is so successfully silenced. This issue is very successfully silenced. It is really difficult to get on X, Twitter, whatever you call it, or YouTube or anywhere. It is really hard to get that kind of information out because they are very good at suppressing that stuff. So anytime you see that kind of stuff, share it. But there's just so many things that you can do. There's so many ways that you can help. If you see one of the Assange activists who are running a fundraising campaign for like the postcard things, stamps are expensive, stuff like that. If you have money to contribute. If you don't, share the fundraiser and help us raise funds in that way. And there's a whole host of events taking place on a regular basis all throughout the world. If you follow, my friend Alex Hills runs the page Candles for Assange. It's the number 4, and that's on Facebook and on Twitter. And she does a great job of collecting all of the global Assange events and then tweeting them out or posting them from one central location so it's easier for people to find. So if you can find an event near you, go to it. If you can't be an event near you, I mean, it's super simple. All you need is poster board, Sharpie, sidewalk, instant protest, or just instant action. Or you can hang flyers, or, I mean, there's a whole host of things that you can do. We genuinely just need help. We need help getting the word out. We need help getting through the algorithms. We need help in a whole host of different ways. So I would recommend people follow some of the fantastic journalism that's going on regarding this case from Consortium News. Kevin Gostola, Declassified UK does a great job. There's a whole bunch of people who are doing great work on this stuff. If you're not super familiar with the case, I recognize that it can be a bit overwhelming because it's been going on for so long and there is a lot. But it really is simple. What it boils down to is the United States is seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism. And I don't know anybody who wouldn't be against that. So try to educate yourself the best that you can. I'm always available on Twitter to anybody who wants to learn more or needs help. If you want to have an event and you need materials, we're always happy to help. So that's really what we need now, is just a continued growth of that momentum. And we need it quick.
Yeah. Absolutely, Misty. And I guess I would just add, and not that this is meant to be like a good time or something like that, but when I've gone to pro Assange events, I've always met friendly people and have, had a good time. Again, serious thing, but talking to like-minded people who maybe don't agree with you on everything, but again, and making new friends and stuff like that could be a good time. So
and
I
that's
know,
one of the
like,
best things about the Assange movement is that it is genuinely nonpartisan. It is post-partisan. It is people from every different political affiliation. It is people from every different walk of life. And we all recognize that we have our differences and disagreements, but we also recognize that the issue that we're fighting for is so much bigger than any of that. And that's my favorite thing about it, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, and also I was just going to add, I think especially in the independent media sphere, everything is so online that, hard to form good relationships that way at times. Yeah. And so just being able to hang out with people, get to know them in person, I think gives you a little bit more, goodwill towards other people and things like that, and could just, kind of help grow the movement in a more positive way. So, definitely check out those events, not just for Assange, but, for all of our anti-empire activism. Now, Misty, I mean, there's a lot going on when it comes to Gaza, particularly the invasion of Rafah. Looks absolutely horrific. But we got a pretty huge news story this morning. I'm not sure about you, but when a couple weeks ago the Israeli press, or Axios, so essentially the Israeli press, was leaking
Yeah.
a story saying that they were preparing indictments against Netanyahu at the ICC. I didn't think much of it because I didn't think
I didn't
something
either.
like that would happen.
Yeah.
But today we have an announcement. ICC prosecutor Karim A.A. Khan KC filed for the arrest warrant of 5 men related to the conflict in Israel. So those are Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, as well as 3 members of Hamas's leadership. That includes Sinwar, who is the head of Hamas and in the Gaza Strip. And then I believe one person who is actually a part of the Hamas political wing and is based in Qatar. So, there's interesting pieces to all this, Misty, but I think from our perspective as Americans, the biggest thing happening for us is that a government that we are about to send 17 billions of dollars of weapons to is headed by 2 men that are now labeled as the ICC as war criminals. So, what do you think of this development?
It's very interesting to say the least. The ICC is notoriously wishy-washy, to say the least, on these types of issues. So I think it really shows that the narrative has shifted. I think that there's no question about it. The Zionists have lost control of the narrative. I think that is, and you can see it, right? You can see it online, the desperation. I mean, they're just making stuff up at this point. And they're just throwing stuff at the walls, hoping that something sticks. I mean, the anti-Semitism claims aren't holding water anymore. And I think that so many people have now been exposed to the reality of the situation. And frankly, that's a lot to do. I mean, we just talked about things being super online, but thanks to online and thanks to social media, people in Gaza have been able to live stream in real time what's happening to them. And I think that has opened a lot of people's eyes and has made a lot of people start to question the things that they've been told about this situation for so long. And I think that prior to that, the Zionists have had an unbelievable PR campaign. I mean, there's no question about it. They've done a fantastic job of controlling mainstream media, making sure that they, are quick with the story and quick with the spin when a situation happens. And that they've really lost their ability to do that at this point. And so I think that that's really what this signifies, is that there's been a massive shift in consciousness and there's a massive shift in support. And you can, I mean, just go on Twitter right now, and the tantrums that are taking place online are, I mean, frankly, delicious, because these are terrible people who are obviously committing a genocide. And so it's very good to see them panicking at this level. But I really think that that's what this signifies. We have seen a shift in consciousness. We have a lot more people who have been exposed to the reality of the situation, which has been hidden for so long. And I think that this only spells good things for the people of Palestine moving forward. Obviously, it doesn't stop what's happening to them right now. But I think that, and as you just mentioned, the idea that we're sending weapons and funding and all of that stuff to, a government that the prime minister has an arrest warrant for war crimes, it's not a good look. It's certainly not a good look. And I'm just wondering when the arrest warrant comes for Joe Biden.
One could only hope, Misty,
Yeah.
as long as a long list of other American presidents who certainly deserve the same treatment. But, as much as I was surprised by this, the case is solid, right? It's not really... You
They
could
brag about it.
Right. You could only use evidence from the Israeli soldiers' social media accounts and probably present a pretty solid case. And on your point about social media before, I will say one of the things that really helped me to see this conflict for what it was is I was watching the news about a Israeli bombing campaign in Gaza. I think it was 2012 or 2014, around that time. I don't think it was like a huge one. I think they were just dropping a couple bombs and the Palestinians fired a couple rockets. And they showed the Israelis bombing somewhere in a city, huge fireball, fighter jet noises. And then they showed a picture of one of the Palestinian or not, they didn't show, but on my phone, I found one. I think it was on Twitter or Facebook at the time. And it showed one of the Palestinian rockets. And it looked like something that you could buy at Hobby Lobby. Yes. And, me and my dad would build these, rockets, and they, come and parachute down. And I thought it was really cool. And when I saw that, I was like, well, how can you drop a bomb because somebody fired one of those rockets at you? Now, I had some questions about why you would fire those rockets in the first place, but at the same time, the bigger question was, there's a pretty big disparity here, and it really
Mm-hmm.
makes you see the Palestinians as, just at the time I was pretty young, an underdog, and so that kind of helped
Yeah.
shape my perspective here. And I'm sure that's happening with a lot of young people, and why the movement is so massive on college campuses today.
Yeah, no question about it. And frankly, I'm really tired of people disparaging the kids on college campuses, and trying to discredit the movement or whatever. Listen, is there some infiltration? Of course. Listen, I've been an activist for a very long time. It's really incredibly rare to find a movement or an action or a rally or something that hasn't been infiltrated to some degree. That's just the reality of activism. That's how it works, especially on an issue as big as this, where there's a lot of political interest, financial interest, all of those things. They want to discredit those things. And so, and what's so fascinating about that is, and you mentioned that, we see them kind of, Israel's destroying themselves from the inside out, as far as I'm concerned. You have these, not even just the soldiers. Benjamin Netanyahu regularly posts his war crimes on social media. They brag about it on a regular basis. And frankly, they've never been shy about their intentions. I mean, they have been talking about wiping Gaza off the face of the planet for a very long time, quite openly. And so it's very frustrating to see people try to discredit these movements, especially when you see there's been numerous times where an infiltrator has gotten in and attempted to make the rallies look anti-Semitic or violent or whatever, and then it turns out that we have evidence that it's not even part of the Palestinian rally. It's just some infiltrator. It's some Zionist who has come in to try to make things look bad, and it's very frustrating to me because I see a lot of people on the right doing that, and did you not see what happened to January 6th? Because the same thing. It's the same thing. Or the trucker protest, when there was the Nazi flag at the trucker protest and an attempt to discredit that movement as well. This happens all the time. And so to understand when it happens to your team and then to suddenly not get it when it happens to somebody you maybe don't agree with is very frustrating to me. But the college campus protests, I think, are a good sign. I think it shows that, as you mentioned, the younger generations, I feel very old when I say that, but the younger generations have been exposed to a lot more information than even we were exposed to as kids. And I think that that's really been a game changer. And I think, honestly, that ties all of this into Assange. And in my opinion, I think the Assange thing, it ties into everything, because that's why they're so desperate to shut down the internet. That's why they're so desperate to shut down TikTok. That's why they're so desperate to gain full control over those avenues of information and all of those things. That's exactly why they want to do it, is what's happening with Palestine. And so it's very frustrating to me when people can't make those connections and recognize how all of those things are intertwined, because they certainly are. And I think that if you are somebody who wants to end war and you want to, really challenge empire and power, then you should be willing to work with just about anybody and to support just about any movement that's doing that. And so I think the campus protests are a great kicking off point. I hope that they continue. I hope that they get a little bit more focused. I've seen that, some of the messaging is, and listen, as a young movement, that's going to happen. You're going to have some sloppy messaging. You're going to have some hiccups. You're going to have some, some bumps in the road, and trying to figure out how to move in this insane world.
You made bad decisions when you're in college.
Of
I
course
know
you
there were
do.
several times where I
Yeah.
was unnecessarily provocative, because
Yeah.
that's what so, and of course, there's so many people who either supported the Black Lives Matter protests, or at least didn't have any particular condemnation of them, who, again, at times it was just misguided provocativism. At times, there's legitimate arson and things like that there.
And Fed infiltration.
Right, and
Listen,
Fed
when pallets
infiltration,
of
but
bricks,
yeah.
when pallets of bricks just magically show up on a street, you need to question where they came from. That's what I was talking about with the right. I mean, they blast the Black Lives Matter protests, and of course there was some shenanigans happening. There's going to be, in a situation that's that emotionally driven, and when people are feeling that frustrated, you're going to have people that lash out. Of course you are, especially when young people are involved, as you just said. So, but yes, you have to. People need to be aware that there is going to be Fed infiltration. They're going to try to make the movement look bad. They're going to try to discredit it. and it happens to all sides. And that's what's frustrating, is that if you can recognize it when it happens to your team, but suddenly when it's the other team, you turn your nose up at the reality of it. That's very frustrating.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And especially when, particularly with these protests, it has been, I hate that CNN ruined the mostly peaceful protest line, because that's a very, very accurate description of what's happened here. Is
Yes.
There's been some property damage, but property damage can be a part of civil disobedience. Occupying buildings and things like that, I think, is within the realm of civil disobedience. But even if you have a problem with that, there's been, again, other things like defacing maybe American like statues that I think is more unwise than actually like violence or a crime. Like maybe have the protesters pay for the cleanup crew, something like that, and move on with it. But they have been absolutely slammed, smeared by Congress. They're talking about taking away financial aid, sending them to Gaza. But I think the worst and most offensive part to it about me, Misty, and this will be the last question before we wrap up here, is the lies that the mainstream media has told to smear these protesters, that they're pro-Hamas and things like that. But when American politicians have gone to these campuses to denounce these protesters, and this is, Joe Biden, this is Mike Johnson, and a whole bunch of others, Laura Blobert or whatever the hell her name is, they all not only call them pro-Hamas, but they'll say things. Biden said that he saw photos of a mom and a woman,
yes,
tied together, a daughter and a mom tied together and burned alive by Hamas, which doesn't exist. He said he claimed 40, beheaded baby photos. Again, doesn't exist, didn't happen. And we have these claims repeated by, and so how is the bar set higher for accuracy and nuance for these college protesters than our mainstream media and elected politicians, where they could just lie about this regularly?
Yes.
And it drives their votes. It drives them to send $17 million to Israel, and there's no accountability there. So I'm not sure there's a lot of a question, but go ahead, weigh in on that, Misty.
No, but I could rant about that, because listen, please, I'm begging you, the next time they tell you they want to protect you from misinformation, remember Joe Biden lying to your face about 40 beheaded babies. Please remember that, because I can't think of much, something more disgusting than lying about 40 beheaded babies in order to advance a genocide. That is so vile. And he's the president of the United States of America. And the idea that these college kids are held to a higher standard than the president of the United States of America blows my mind. And you talked about property damage. I mean, do we want to talk about the property damage in Gaza, or no? We're not having that conversation, because it's rubble. Like, the entirety of Gaza is rubble, and we're not going to talk about that. But you're mad about some windows getting broken on a college campus. The entitlement and the I don't even know what it is. The arrogance of thinking that a broken window on a college campus is more important than an entire city being wiped off the map.
Equivalent to Kristallnacht or something like that, right? Like, that's what they're comparing it to. Like, these college students are replicating Nazi behavior. It's not just that this is like bad. This is replicating Nazi behavior is what they're being smeared with. And I'm not being hyperbolic at all. This is actually what is being repeated across the political spectrum.
Yes, terrorist sympathizers, you're pro-Hamas. And it has nothing to do with being pro-Hamas. I mean, I'm sure that there are some people who, in watching Hamas resist, feel some sort of, especially young kids are probably, that's as you mentioned, it's an underdog story, right? I think people gravitate towards that a lot. And I think that there's but I mean, I just tweeted about this recently. What if I told you don't have to condemn or support Hamas? You can just recognize that Palestine has a right to resist. Period. They are under illegal occupation and have been for decades. And it's very weird to me that people can't make that recognition. I mean, just put yourself in the shoes of the average Gazan. If you were under brutal military occupation for decades, you've had to deal with it. Your mother had to deal with it. Your grandmother had to deal with it. Your entire family has been living under brutal military occupation. Your kids are constantly shot at and tortured and arrested, kidnapped, held in military detention for who knows how long. And your access to food is restricted. I mean, Israel, they studied how much caloric intake it kept, like, just to sustain life, and then that's all the food that they would allow into Gaza was just enough to keep everybody alive. That is unbelievably horrific. And if you were living under that situation, would you not resist? I know I would. if you're treating my kids that way, you better believe that I am going to resist, and there's going to be resistance group. But I think Hamas is such a it's a smokescreen. It's a distraction. Listen, nobody supports Hamas more than Israel has. I mean, Scott Horton and Connor Freeman did a great write-up where they went back and found all of the quotes from high-level Israeli officials, Benjamin Netanyahu himself, about how we have to support Hamas. They've funded it, all of this stuff. And it's no different than what the United States does. We go in and we fund these resistance groups in order to overthrow. You know what I mean? It's such an obvious playbook, and the idea that people can't make that connection and recognize the game that's being played here is very strange to me. You don't have to condemn Hamas. You don't have to support Hamas. I support the people of Palestine, period. And I support whatever they want to do in terms of resisting their occupier. And if that means that they want to support Hamas, and listen, the people of Palestine are not a monolith. I'm sure some of them support Hamas. I'm sure some of them hate Hamas. I'm sure some of them support, dozens of Palestinian resistance groups. So I think Hamas is a distraction. I think it's been made the boogeyman. It's the big, scary word that everybody recognizes, and that's what's being used to kind of create, that scare tactic and that sort of fear-mongering situation. But yeah, I think that Palestinians have a right to resist, period. And I think any one of us, if we were in that situation, would do everything that we could in order to resist what's happening to them. And it's mind-blowing to me that more people can't see it.
Yeah. Well, Misty, we should wrap up here, or else we're just going to rant for another hour. And I told you I have you out of here by this time. So thank you so much for coming back on the show. I know you're working on rolling out the Misty Winston show again. Looking forward to that. I will be sure to, retweet you and put it out to my audience.
And you will be a guest frequently. Okay. I love having you on. So yes.
Well, everybody be sure to follow Misty on Twitter. That way you kind of keep up with what she's doing when she reintroduces the new show. You can start listening, because I'm sure you will want to listen to every episode, including the very first one. So Misty, thank you so much for returning to the show, and we will have to do it again. I'll have you back on before we have more bad news about Assange to talk about.
Well, maybe we'll have some good news next time. Right. That would be fun for a change.
All right. Sounds good, Misty.